Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
The morning air felt heavy as I pushed through the maternity ward doors, sunflowers clutched in one hand, their bright faces mocking the dread coiling in my stomach. I'd chosen these blooms because they were Sienna's favorite, cheerful, bold, alive, and in my mind I pictured her smile when she saw them. Instead, I walked down a silent corridor broken only by the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional distant cry of a newborn. Nurses stepped aside, offering polite nods as I passed, but my mind was already halfway down another path, the one where Sienna's eyes crinkled with joy, and we shared our son's first moments together. My heart pounding, I approached the door marked Room 412. The thin crack of wood against the frame was enough to let me hear laughter, Sienna's laugh, that warm, melodic sound I'd sworn to protect, and then Jordan's voice, low and conspiratorial. He has no clue, his words floated through the gap like poisonous pollen. At least he's a good cash cow. A cashier that I was, yes, my name on the mortgage, my credit lines funding their comforts, my trust exploited without a second thought. I froze, sunflowers rooted halfway to her door. Behind me, the corridor stretched empty. Ahead, Sienna's laughter, bright and unguarded, cut me deeper than any blade. I pressed closer, heart hammering so loud it felt like someone drumming inside my ribcage. And then I heard her mother's voice, smooth and venomous. You too deserve happiness. He's just a useless failure. Their laughter rippled through the narrow space where I had once imagined tenderness. I should have pushed open that door, stormed in, and demanded the truth. I should have slapped Jordan's smug face or shaken Sienna until her eyes filled with shame. Instead, the sunflowers quivered in my hand, and I realized there simply weren't enough words to express the betrayal I felt. My son was being celebrated like a trophy, an excuse for greed, while I stood outside, blinded by disbelief. I glanced at the nurses bustling by, their faces expectant. None of them knew the secret that had just shattered my world. The infant they hailed as my flesh and blood was a commodity in someone else's scheme. Sienna's final words, "Thanks. I'll make sure we're happy," echoed, a hollow promise of complicity. Happiness for her meant deceit, and my own freedom to be a father was nothing but a lie. I turned away, sunflowers trailing behind me like dropped hopes. The polished floor reflected my stiff shoulders and the sudden ache of every step. I expected tears, anger, heartbreak, but all I felt was a cold clarity settling in my chest. I wouldn't run. I wouldn't hide. I would prepare. Outside, the sky was a pale wash of dawn, and the chilly air snapped at my collar. I walked past the valet stand, ignored the concerned glance of the security guard, and drove straight to the nearest business suite in town. The building's mirrored glass felt like a shield. Inside, no one knew me as Sienna's husband. In that sterile room, I laid the sunflowers on a sleek desk, their petals wilting already. I booted up my laptop and surveyed every account linked to my name. Joint checking, savings, investments, retirement funds, and beneath it all, the quiet hum of betrayal. $27,000 vanished in the last 6 months. Jordan's startup, marketed as our shared dream, was bankrolled entirely by me. My name was on the house deed, the car titles, every prenatal bill for her private physician. I'd sponsored their extravagance while they plotted to erase me. I tapped my phone and called Layla Reeves, my lawyer, the woman who understood how to turn legal chaos into clarity. I need full financial isolation, asset protection, and a controlled burn, I said, voice flat but resolute. She paused only a heartbeat before replying, "I'll make it happen." By midnight, I had set wheels in motion. Trusts were erected, accounts rerouted, property titles secured beyond Sienna's reach. $2,100,000 slipped silently from my estate into a new trust, untouchable, irrevocable. As the hours ticked by, I felt the tension in my shoulders ease, replaced by a cold determination. If she wanted a cash cow, she would find the pasture bare. Dawn broke again, and I found myself driving back to the hospital with a different bouquet of purpose. No longer sunflowers, but a plan rooted in truth. I rehearsed my words on the ride. Calm, measured, devastating. This time, when I walked through that door, I wouldn't be the frightened husband. I would be the architect of her reckoning. The hospital corridor welcomed me like an arena. Chapter 1 of their deceit had ended outside that room. Chapter 2 would begin here. I straightened my tie, wiped my palms on my trousers, and with sunflowers discarded, reached for the door handle. Inside, everyone expected congratulations. What awaited them was something far more powerful: consequences. I didn't call. I didn't send a single text. I slipped out of the hospital just before sunrise, the corridors empty and echoing with the distant hum of life's beginnings. My suit felt heavy against my skin, the weight of betrayal pressing me forward with each deliberate step. I drove away from the building where my world had fractured, windows down despite the chill that bit at my cheeks. The city's skyline was still half asleep, dark towers etched against the faint glow of morning, yet I felt more awake than I ever had. By the time I checked into the business suite, the sun had climbed higher, pale light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. The room was immaculate, minimalist furnishings, glass desk, leather chair, an environment designed for efficiency, not comfort. I placed the sunflowers face down on the desk, their petals drooping like wilted promises. I set my briefcase beside them and opened my laptop, the screen's glow a harsh beacon in the quiet room. I stared at my reflection in the blackened screen. The man looking back was the same I'd always been: principled, trusting, hardworking. But underneath that veneer, something had shifted. The heat of rage had crystallized into something colder and more precise. I slid my fingers across the keyboard, pulling up every account linked to my name. Joint checking with Sienna, our combined savings, investment portfolios, trust funds, retirement accounts. I sifted through them methodically, an investigator uncovering a crime scene. $27,000 missing in the last 6 months alone, siphoned into Jordan's business venture. The numbers scrolled past with brutal clarity, each transaction a proof of my own generosity twisted into treachery. I traced the funds back to purchases online, luxury items at boutiques I'd never heard of, and early payments to contractors renovating Marisol's kitchen. The woman who called me useless failure had spent my money without shame, feeding her mother's whims while mocking me behind closed doors. I closed the spreadsheet and exhaled, surprisingly calm. The emotional storm that threatened to engulf me had settled into a cool determination. I opened a new tab and drafted an email to Layla Reeves, my lawyer since incorporation of my logistics firm the previous year. The subject line read, "Urgent. Asset protection and isolation." I waited only long enough to see the sent confirmation before leaning back in the chair. Moments later, my phone buzzed with a reply. Layla's response was laconic but efficient. "Understood. I'll have documents ready by end of day. Expect directives for transfer." As I watched her message, I felt a crooked sort of relief. No need to explain. No need to justify. She was accustomed to my penchant for foresight and to my ability to turn crisis into strategy. The rest of the day passed in a blur of legalese and financial maneuvers. I signed dozens of digital forms, established a new irrevocable trust, and authorized transfers that would move $2,100,000 out of reach. By dusk, the lion's share of my assets was secured in accounts Sienna couldn't access, shielded by layers of corporate structure and legal firewalls. Our house mortgage, the joint checking, even the car leases, everything in my name alone now, everything protected from her hand. Yet despite the complexity of the transactions, each click felt like a release valve for the pressure building inside me. As the final confirmation appeared on screen, my chest loosened slightly. I closed the laptop and allowed myself a moment to breathe, the city lights twinkling below like a field of stars just beyond my grasp. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I paced the suite's hardwood floors, plotting the next steps with the calm precision of a chess master surveying the board. The narrative of my life with Sienna had been rewritten by their deceit. Now it was time for me to redraw the lines. I drafted letters in my mind. Letters to my bank explaining the account closures, to Jordan demanding restitution, to Sienna delivering the blow she didn't see coming. Each sentence was carefully weighed, every phrase honed to pierce the armor they'd worn so confidently. Before dawn, I typed a final email to Layla: proceed with preparations for divorce filing. Grounds: fraud, adultery, emotional distress. Initiate asset freeze for Marisol's unauthorized spending. Include Jordan in paternity litigation. I hit send and felt the last vestiges of hesitation drain away. There was no turning back. The quiet before the storm had given me clarity, and clarity demanded execution. When the morning sun rose again, I walked to the hospital in a crisp suit and tie, a man transformed. The wounds of betrayal were still fresh, but they had hardened into resolve. I carried no flowers this time, only a folder of documents, each one a tool of reckoning. As I approached room 412, the same spot where their laughter had broken me, I felt neither anger nor sorrow. Instead, a serene confidence settled in my bones, the knowledge that actions taken in silence were often the most devastating. I paused outside the door, breathing deeply. Behind it lay the staged happiness they'd built on my goodwill. Ahead lay the moment I would reclaim my narrative. No sound came from within now, only the distant coos of an infant oblivious to the drama surrounding his birth. I inhaled the antiseptic air and stepped forward, letting the door swing open. The quiet before the storm was over. It was time to unleash the storm itself. 2 mornings later, I returned to the hospital, the chill of dawn still clinging to my skin. I parked several blocks away, slipping into the backseat of my car to tamper with my reflection in the mirror, tightening my tie, smoothing my hair, erasing every sign of the sleepless nights I'd endured. My heart thudded with measured calm. Today would be different. Today, I would play the doting husband, the proud new father, the devoted partner, all while holding the dagger I'd forged in secret. I carried a thin manila envelope in my jacket pocket, its contents weighty with purpose. Inside, a neatly typed letter and a pre-printed waiver. I hadn't told Sienna what it truly was. I would simply lie, let her sign, and watch her seal her own downfall. I honed the lie until it gleamed with plausibility. "We need to open a savings account for Junior," I would say. "The bank requires your signature." As I approached room 412, I rehearsed each syllable until it felt like truth. The maternity wing was quieter than before, fewer visitors, fewer smiles. I nodded at the nurse behind the desk. She offered a polite, sympathetic look. I stepped into the corridor, the familiar buzz of hospital machinery enveloping me. I saw the window to my son's room and felt a pang. This tiny life, innocent and unaware, was at the heart of the greatest betrayal I'd ever known. I squared my shoulders and knocked once, softly. Sienna opened the door before I could step inside, her face bright and untroubled. She held our son, no, her son, in her arms, swathed in pastel blankets. His tiny chest rose and fell in gentle rhythm. She looked radiant, as though yesterday's storm never happened. "You're here," she said with practiced surprise. Her smile was perfect, unmarred by guilt. "I thought you'd be tied up with work." I returned her grin, stepping over the threshold. I was. Things got delayed, but I had to see him. I indicated the envelope in my jacket. "I brought something paperwork for a baby savings account." Her eyebrows rose. "Already?" Her tone was breezy, casual. She handed the baby to me as I closed the door behind us. I held him carefully, his head swaddled, eyes fluttering like sleepy moths. He stank of formula and fresh linen. I inhaled his scent, tasting the bittersweet irony. I had nurtured every cent of this child's first months, yet I was nothing but a pawn in someone else's game. I handed her the letter. "The bank needs your signature to open it," I said. "Just sign at the bottom." She took the paper, reading the letter quickly with an affectionate half-smile. I watched her pen glide along the line, forming her name in elegant script. The moment she handed back the paper, I slid the waiver out of the envelope's inner flap and tucked it into my own coat pocket. "Perfect," I said quietly. "They'll send the account details to our home email." Her mother, Marisol, hovered by the foot of the bed, arms crossed and lips pursed. She wore the same cold expression I'd seen 2 days ago, but now her gaze lingered on me with something like calculation. I met her eyes evenly. "Morning, Marisol," I said. She nodded curtly but said nothing. I shifted my weight, careful not to disturb the baby's slumber. I could feel her looking at me as if she still believed I was a sham, a failure. I handed the infant back to Sienna. She cradled him against her shoulder, cooing softly. The lullaby she hummed was unremarkable, but it fit the scene, a mother bonding with her child, the world external to their connection. I swallowed the bitter knot in my throat and smiled. "He's beautiful," I said, voice low. Every word tasted like ash. Sienna's lips curved upward. "Our little miracle." She leaned forward to kiss my cheek, sweet and public. I closed my eyes, felt the press of her lips, and stored that moment in a vault of memory I would later shudder. When I opened my eyes again, I saw the baby's fist curl around one of my fingers, a perfect, unknowing grip. I didn't flinch. Instead, I let the contact linger for a heartbeat before releasing my hand. "Do you want to tell your mother something?" I asked gently, and Marisol stiffened. Sienna laughed, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you," she said. voice soft. But I think I've explored all the gratitude I can muster for one morning. I chuckled, a real, warm sound, and collected the envelope on the bedside table. All right, I said. I'll go take care of the paperwork. I love you both. I kissed Sienna lightly on the forehead, then offered a trembling smile at the baby. I'll see you soon, champ. Stepping back into the corridor, I exhaled hard enough to fog the hospital window. In my palm lay the waiver, signed with an agreement I'd never intend to honor. That signature was my golden ticket. With it, Layla could claim Sienna's complicity in opening that account and secure legal proof of her authorization. When our divorce filing named her claims as fraudulent, the bank would side with me. Outside, the morning sun soared higher, warming the pavement. I stuffed the paper into my coat, each crease a promise of restitution. My plan had advanced another notch. They thought I was the doting husband. They thought I was the unsuspecting father. They thought they'd caught me off guard. But trust, once fractured, was a weapon in my hands. I hailed a cab to the bank downtown, surrendering my facade to indifferent strangers at the teller's window. I signed forms, sealed documents, and ensured the new trust fund for Junior, the new savings account, was established with funds Sienna would never reach. The world around me bustled. Business people with fresh coffees, tourist consulting maps, street vendors shouting greetings. Life went on, unaware of the quiet engineering at its heart. When I emerged from the bank, the sunflowers I once carried had long since withered. In their place, I held a stack of bank receipts, proof of my victory. I smiled, not with cruelty, but with the serene precision of a man who'd learned to shape his destiny. Tomorrow, I would return to room 412 again, this time armed with indisputable evidence. But for now, I allowed myself a final moment of calm, the knowledge that I had turned their own deception against them, and that truth, when delivered, would cut deeper than any lie. I laid out my plan like a chess player setting the pieces for the final endgame, precise, deliberate, and utterly cold. For 2 weeks, I played the part of the doting husband. Fetching diapers at midnight, brewing bottles of formula stronger than espresso, and grinning for the camera as Sienna cooed for perfectly staged Instagram posts. I'd hummed lullabies in the nursery, carried Junior in the sling across the city park, and even risked wearing pastel onesies for a father-son photo shoot that I posted on my own feed, complete with the hashtag blessed dad. Every smile I gave her, every eager, "Honey, let me help," I offered, was a step deeper into the trap I was about to spring. The real weapon sat discreetly on my desk at home, a DNA test kit I'd ordered in confidence, disguised as a routine blood panel. Layla had arranged it under the pretense of checking for genetic predispositions, a plausible excuse no doctor would question. The envelope had arrived sealed in medical-grade plastic, stamped private patient, and at dawn on day 14, I slipped it into my messenger bag beside a stack of office files. I watched Sienna from the doorway of our bedroom that morning as she fussed over Junior's outfit, a miniature tuxedo onesie with a bow tie printed on the chest. She beamed at her reflection in the mirror, cooed encouragement to the baby, and lingered for a perfect snapshot. My chest tightened. I loved Junior more than anything in the world, but love had nothing to do with this lie. This was justice. I cleared my throat. "Sweetheart, I need your help." Her smile faltered as she turned. "What is it?" She placed the baby on the changing table, careful fingers brushing his tuft of dark hair. I held up the sterile kit. The doctor suggested a blood panel for potential genetic markers. I kept my voice soft, concerned. I thought it was wise. Sienna blinked, lips pursed in thought. "A blood test." She glanced at the plastered brochure, showing smiling parents holding toddlers. "Sounds fine." She picked up a Band-Aid and a pencil, signed the consent form in neat, flowing script. Each stroke of her pen etched the final seal on my trap. We drove to the lab together, a banal scene of suburban normalcy. NPR on the radio, Junior asleep in his car seat, me humming along with the announcer. At the clinic, Sienna chatted with the phlebotomist, nervously nursing a mug of lukewarm coffee as she waited for her turn. I stroked her hair, murmuring comforting words. All the while, Layla's instructions whispered in my mind. Make sure she signs. Document everything. The blood draw took minutes. My heart thudded, each beat echoing with the promise of revelation. Sienna squeezed my hand, unfazed, earnest in her belief that I was simply looking out for our family's health. She had no idea I was drawing out her complicity in the greatest lie of our lives. 3 days later, I held the envelope in my hands the way a soldier might cradle orders. I'd arranged for discreet pickup, no lab tech in a white coat, just a courier handing me a sealed packet marked paternity results, confidential. My fingertips tingled with anticipation as I ripped it open. Inside lay a single sheet of paper, crisp and clinical. Probability of paternity, 0%. No trembling, no disbelief, just a steady inhalation of relief and cold fury. Our son was not mine. Every lullaby, every nursery rhyme, every "I love you, Dad" that I had whispered was an embrace of my own deception. But now I held proof. I slid the test back into its envelope and tucked it into my coat. That evening, I texted Jordan, "Want to grab a drink? Celebrate being a new uncle?" The message stung with irony. He replied almost instantly, "Sure. Hit me at 7. I watched the screen with a detached calm, knowing I was about to record his downfall. At the rooftop bar's entrance, the city lights shimmered below like fireflies trapped in glass. Jordan stood at the rail, drink in hand, looking every bit the smug benefactor. Smart blazer, designer jeans, easy grin. He waved me over. I perched on the stool beside him, ordered water. When the waiter left, I tapped my phone. The recording app blinked red. Jordan laughed. "Congrats again, man. Seriously, Sienna's knocked up, and she'll be calling you Dad for life." He winked. "You're rich enough. Might as well enjoy the perks." He drank, let the bourbon burn down his throat, and exhaled a satisfied sigh. I took a steady breath. "Thanks, Jordan. But did you know your friend here might have other ideas?" I slid the envelope across the bar. He looked confused, reached for it, and I tapped the recording. Jordan confessing the affair, his laughter at my ignorance, Sienna's part in the conspiracy. His eyes widened as he read the document, and his voice, thick with shock, replayed in my ear through the app. "Dude, I didn't think you'd find out," he stammered. Sienna, she told me it was temporary. After she got the second trust, she'd divorce you. You wouldn't even know." His confession spilled out in unguarded fragments. The nights they spent plotting, the funds I unwittingly wired into a shadow company, their plan to leave me high and dry once the papers were signed. I pressed stop on the recording and slid my phone across the table so he could see the timestamp. His face twisted from panic to desperation. "Listen, man, we can fix this. I'll pay you back. Just don't broadcast it." I leaned in close. "I have another plan." My voice was low, satisfied, controlled. "You and Sienna owe me more than money." I stood, sliding the envelope into my coat, phone in my hand. "Enjoy the view." Without waiting for his reply, I walked away, leaving him and the night's lights behind. On the ride home, rain began to fall, pattering against the windshield in a slow, steady rhythm. I watched the droplets race each other down the glass, reminded me how quickly lies ran, and how impossible they were to catch once they gathered momentum. But I had them now, trapped in evidence I controlled. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had already drafted the next move. A recording of Jordan's confession, the 0% paternity result, a letter of demand to Sienna. In the gray half-light of morning, I sat at my desk, listening to the rain, and smiled. I had finally engineered the truth. And in doing so, I had rewritten the rules of their betrayals. They would soon discover that the greatest trap is when you lay yourself, and then spring with ruthless precision. 3 weeks later, the Levinson home buzzed with polite laughter and clinking silverware as our welcome baby dinner party unfolded at Marisol's house. I arrived early, carrying one final bouquet, white lilies this time, symbolizing both purity and farewell. The foyer was garlanded with pastel balloons and framed ultrasound pictures. Every detail had been curated by Sienna to convey warmth and gratitude. Yet my mind cataloged it all with clinical precision. The oblong dining table laid with crystalline wine glasses, Marisol's perfectly manicured hands arranging place cards, and Jordan hovering near the hors d'oeuvres tray, his smile brittle. Sienna greeted me at the top of the stairs, her arm warm against mine. "You made it," she whispered, voice bright as candlelight. "Thank you." She wore a fitted peacock blue dress that accentuated her curves. I nodded, returning her smile, a gesture so habitual no one would suspect how hollow it felt. I slipped my arm around her waist and followed her down. Inside the dining room, guests murmured congratulations as I passed. Jordan's business partner Mike offering an enthusiastic handshake, Sienna's college roommate Tracy beaming, Marisol's friends from the country club lounging on antique sofas. Even a few distant relatives had flown in, their soft laughter weaving through the air. Junior's crib stood in the corner, draped in ivory lace, a silent testament to the child at the heart of this performance. I took my seat at the head of the table, the very place Marisol had insisted upon, feeling the weight of my role as host and father. As servers poured sparkling cider, Sienna lifted her glass. "To family," she began, her tone rich with sentiment. "To our beautiful baby boy." I caught her eye and allowed a genuine warmth to surface, recalling the instant I first saw Junior's tiny features, unaware then of the lie that shadowed his birth. When the meal concluded and laughter subsided into contented sighs, I rose, glass raised. The murmurs hushed. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," I said, voice steady. "Your support means more than you know." I tapped the side of my glass. "To family and to truth." At that, I pressed play on my phone's speaker, and Jordan's rooftop confession crackled through the room. His voice, sheepish and raw, spilled out accusations I'd recorded. The admission of the affair, the plot to divert my funds, the plan to leverage Junior's paternity for divorce settlements. The first note reverberated against the chandelier, and eyes widened around the table. Marisol's hand flew to her mouth. Her lipstick-stained fingers trembled. Sienna's face drained of color, her exclamation stuck, breath hitching in her throat. I let the tape run its course. Guests sank lower in their chairs, jaws slack, as Jordan's shameful laughter and Sienna's complicit responses filled the air. When the recording ended, a heavy silence settled, thick and irrevocable. I lifted my glass again. "Thank you," I said softly, tone calm as midnight. Sienna's eyes burned with unshed tears, Jordan's cheeks flushed with humiliation. Marisol stared at me, disbelief giving way to fury. Hands shaking, Sienna stood. "How could you?" she stammered. "You." Her voice cracked. The blue silk of her dress caught the chandelier's glitter. I placed my glass on the table. "You built this party on lies," I replied. "You celebrated my generosity and called it love. You laughed while calling me a fool." I paused, letting the words linger. "So tonight, I celebrate something else." I reached into an envelope I tucked into my jacket pocket. "This is a post-nuptial agreement, effective immediately," I said, sliding the paperwork across to Sienna. "Everything you own is now frozen. Any assets you thought were yours have been returned." Gasps rippled through the room. Flashbulbs of realization illuminated each face. I addressed the silent assembly. "If you wish to continue contributing to this family, you'll do so honestly. Otherwise, this dinner is over." Marisol sprang to her feet, voice trembling with outrage. "You can't do this," she shouted. "I'm family." She jabbed a finger in my direction. "You're the monster." I met her gaze, unflinching. "I'm simply a man who refused to be played." Sienna, pale and unsteady, folded her arms. "You're ruining everything," she said, voice quivering. "This was supposed to be our night." I stepped forward, hands open. "I gave you trust, and you repaid me with betrayal." My tone softened. "I want you to be happy, Sienna, truly happy, just not at my expense." With that, I turned and walked from the room, lilies falling from my grip and scattering across the polished floor. Chairs scraped as guests watched me leave like actors observing an unscripted climax. I passed the crib one last time. Junior slept on, innocent amid the wreckage. Outside on the lawn, the night air was cool, scented with dewy grass. I inhaled deeply, letting the truth clear the toxin of betrayal from my lungs. Sirens wailed in the distance. By morning, the recordings would spread beyond these walls. But I was beyond fear. I had confronted the lie and rendered it powerless. As I walked to my car, I felt the first glimmer of release. The celebration they'd planned had become their undoing. Justice had been served not with violence or revenge, but with undeniable evidence and a refusal to tolerate deceit. I dropped into the driver's seat, closing the door with a sense of finality. In the rearview mirror, I saw the glow of Marisol's window, light spilling onto the lawn like fractured hope. I started the engine and drove away, lilies left behind, carrying only the promise that I would never again be the fool in someone else's story. The morning after the dinner party, a dull ache settled behind my eyes as though the collision of truth and betrayal had left me bruised. I woke in my penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, the same view that had once symbolized possibility now muted by the shadow of what had transpired. I lay still in the quiet, listening to the hum of city traffic far below, and wondered how a single night of revelations could reshape so many lives. I reached for my phone. 27 missed calls from Sienna. 4 from Layla. Half a dozen texts from Jordan, frantic and incoherent. I let them go to voicemail. Their urgency no longer demanded my immediate attention. I turned instead to the recorded confession, my greatest weapon, saved in 3 secure locations. I replayed Jordan's voice one more time. The smug inflections turned to regret, and felt a strange blend of pity and satisfaction. By mid-morning, the leak had begun. Someone, nobody knew who, had forwarded the tape to Jordan's investors. Within hours, top executives of his startup received identical emails titled, "A Matter of Integrity." Inside, details of Jordan's admitted embezzlement and conspiracy to exploit my funds were laid bare. I watched from my living room as his company's stock ticker plunged, investor calls flooded in, and legal notices began to stack in his inbox. My satisfaction was tempered by the realization that collateral damage would ripple outward, employees losing jobs, partners facing scrutiny, but I had set this consequence in motion. Justice and collateral damage often travel together. I dialed Layla's number. "It's time," I said when she answered. "File for divorce, grounds of adultery, fraud, emotional distress, and serve Marisol with restitution claims for the kitchen remodel and unauthorized expenditures." She acknowledged, her tone clipped. "I'll have everything on your desk by this afternoon." I hung up and turned to my laptop. My calendar was already filling with media inquiries. One request to comment for a business magazine, another from a local morning show wanting the inside scoop on the scandal. I drafted a brief statement. I was deeply disappointed by actions of those I once called family and friends. I was focused on my son's well-being and taking all necessary legal measures. It sounded bland, but bland was perfect. Let the sensational tapes make the headlines. I would remain the poised professional. By early afternoon, Sienna's voicemail began to overflow again. I listened to her pleas. "We can fix this. I never meant to hurt you. Please, just talk to me." Her voice cracked with desperation. I felt a pang of regret, surprisingly tender, but it was drowned by the calm certainty that none of her promises could erase the web of lies she had woven. I drafted a single text back. "Layla will be in touch." That evening, I left the penthouse for the first time since dawn. The air outside was crisp, the sun slipping toward the horizon, painting the skyline in streaks of gold and lavender. I walked to my favorite corner cafe, passing couples laughing on patios, joggers gliding along the lakefront path, and families strolling with their children. Life carried on, blissfully unaware of the tempest in my life. Inside, the barista greeted me by name. I ordered a black coffee, strong enough to cut through my lingering fatigue, and took a seat by the window. My gaze drifted over the swirling steam as I considered the wreckage left in the storm's wake. Jordan's reputation lay in tatters. He might never rebuild the trust he squandered. Marisol's dignity, which she prized above all, had been publicly dismantled. Sienna's world, once cushioned by my financial security, was unraveling at the edges. I sipped the coffee and opened the local business paper. The headline screamed in bold, "Cash cow no more. Tech CEO's betrayal exposed." Beneath it, a photo of Jordan looking pale and haggard, cuffed by federal agents. Another article profiled Sienna's tearful apology at her mother's country club fundraiser, her face streaked with mascara. I found myself studying her expression, searching for the woman I had loved. The features were familiar, but the innocence was gone. My phone buzzed with a message from Layla, "Divorce petition filed. Serving papers on Monday. Also served Marisol. Drafted restitution claim. Check your inbox." I opened my email and scanned the attachments, summons, financial affidavits, and a detailed claim itemizing the $45,000 Marisol had spent from my accounts. The numbers were precise: every kitchen appliance, every decorating expense, every catered brunch. I felt a moment of dark amusement. The woman who branded me useless failure was about to pay dearly for her own greed. I stood, leaving a tip on the table. As I stepped outside, the evening air was cooler, carrying the faint scent of rain. Thunder rumbled softly overhead, and I pulled my coat tighter. The storm was coming again, nature's echo of the chaos in my life. But this time I felt ready. I had set events in motion that could not be reversed. Walking back to my penthouse, I reflected on the choices that had brought me here. I had allowed my trust to be exploited, my generosity to be weaponized. But I had also learned the power of silence, the potency of evidence, and the strength of measured response. The man I was before, the one who carried sunflowers into a trap, was gone. In his place stood someone forged by truth and tempered by betrayal. When I reached home, the city lights shimmered on the water below. I paused at the window, hands in my pockets, and watched the rain begin to fall in gentle sheets. The droplets raced each other down the glass, dissolving the reflections behind them. I realized then that the past would wash away with time, leaving behind a clearer view of who I was and what I stood for. I turned and moved toward the desk where Junior's crib proximity monitor sat silent. I touched the monitor's smooth surface, thinking of my son, innocent, unknowing of the dramas roiling around him. He deserved better than the lies that had birthed him. He would grow up knowing the truth. That his father fought for him with every resource at his command. I withdrew the paternity test from the drawer and placed it next to the monitor. In that single sheet of paper lay both the wound and the cure. It had freed me from a life built on deceit. Now, with the fallout behind me and the legal storm gathering on the horizon, I felt something I hadn't in months: clarity. I poured myself a glass of water and raised it in a silent toast. To lessons learned, to truths revealed, and to the future I would build, one shaped not by empty promises or borrowed funds, but by integrity and purpose. The storm raged outside, but inside, I was at peace. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and anxious energy, a blend of expectations and dread that settled over me like a shroud. I stood in the back row, leaned in on my palms, breathing slowly, as Sienna and Jordan fumbled through opening statements. Their faces were etched with fatigue, hers a pale mask of shame, his a taut mask of defiance. In that moment, I understood that truth was more intoxicating than any lie, and more feared than any threat. My lawyer, Layla Reeves, sat beside me, her posture impeccably upright. She had orchestrated this hearing with the same precision she had used to protect my assets. At her signal, the court clerk called my motion to enter the paternity results as evidence. A hush fell. I could feel every eye in the room turn to me. The judge, an older woman with silver hair tied in a bun, nodded curtly for me to proceed. I stepped forward, carrying the sealed envelope with deliberate calm. The jury stole glances. Sienna's hand clenched in her lap. Jordan's gaze flickered to the floor. I approached the bench and presented the document, voice measured. Your Honor, I submit Exhibit A, the certified paternity test results indicating a 0% probability of paternity. The judge peered at the envelope, then at Layla, who offered a succinct affirmation. Your Honor, we request that the court recognize Mr. Reed as legally not the father of the child born to Ms. Levinson on April 3rd, and to grant all associated relief under the family code. Jordan's attorney rose, voice quivering. Your Honor, we object. This test was obtained without proper chain of custody protocols. Layla cut him off. On the contrary, Your Honor, the test was administered and documented under strict medical supervision, with Ms. Levinson's signed consent, witnessed by hospital staff and recorded in the hospital's legal department. She laid the signed consent form and lab reports on the bench. The results are indisputable. The judge examined the paperwork, then set it aside. Very well. Exhibit A is admitted. Her gavel tapped once. Mr. Reed, you may step back. My pulse throbbed, but I stayed composed as I returned to my seat. The judge's admission of the test results carried more weight than any speech I could offer. The burden of proof shifted. The burden of shame would fall on the conspirators. Over the next hour, Jordan's lawyer sputtered through feeble defenses, claims of procedural impropriety, suggestions that the results were tampered with, while Layla dismantled each argument with calm clarity. When they rested, the judge dismissed the jury and addressed the courtroom directly. It is the finding of this court that Mr. Miles Reed is not the biological father of the Levinson child. I hereby grant Ms. Levinson's petition to designate Mr. Jordan Hayes as the legal father, effective immediately. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Marisol cried out, "No," and Sienna covered her face with both hands. Jordan slumped in his seat, eyes downcast. The judge continued, Mr. Hayes, you were ordered to assume all parental responsibilities, including child support, medical care, and guardianship duties as if the child were born within your marriage. Ms. Levinson, You will have 1 week to arrange for a suitable living situation that reflects this new arrangement. She rapped her gavel. Court is adjourned. Silence followed that final strike. I sat quietly, absorbing the ripple effects. Jordan's name now legally bound to the child. Sienna stripped of the myth of fatherhood she had peddled so callously. Marisol forced to reckon with her own miscalculations. When the bailiff called us out one by one, I lingered until everyone else had filed out. Outside the courtroom, the spring air felt crisp, the sun bright but distant. I walked down the steps slowly, each one a step away from a lie that had nearly consumed me. Journalists craned their necks, cameras flashed for the scandal, but I kept my gaze forward. I didn't owe them a soundbite. The truth had spoken loudly enough. I found Jordan near his rented sedan, suitcase at his feet. He looked up, eyes red-rimmed. I'm sorry, he whispered. Regret trembled in his voice. I met his gaze. Sorry won't change your choices, but you can make amends. He nodded, words failing him. I turned away. Legal responsibility was his now. The consequences of his actions would shape his life henceforth. Further down, Sienna stood beneath a blossoming magnolia tree, face streaked with tears but lifted toward the sunlight as if seeking absolution. I approached her quietly. She blinked back tears. You ruined us, she said, voice fragile. I paused, gently. You built us on lies. I just gave you a mirror. She closed her eyes, absorbing the weight of that truth. I didn't linger. I placed a hand on her shoulder briefly and left her to find her own path forward. Back in my car, I sank into the seat and stared at the steering wheel, letting its cool leather calm the storm inside me. Junior's future was secure now, anchored to the man who had brought him into this world honestly. My role, once defined by biology, had been clarified by integrity. I started the engine and drove away, the courthouse receding in the rearview mirror. As I merged onto the highway, the city spread out before me, full of possibility. The path ahead was mine to choose. The burdens of the past would not be carried any further. The real father had been named, and in his place, I stepped into a new chapter, one guided by truth, unbound by lies, and open to whatever life would offer next. When the ink dried on the divorce decree and the final restitution checks cleared, I felt the first stirrings of something I hadn't dared to feel in months: possibility. The fall had been savage. Public scandal, fractured trust, shattered alliances, but beneath the wreckage lay fertile ground for renewal. I spent the first morning of my freedom standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, watching the sunrise shimmer across Lake Michigan. The city stirred below, oblivious to the personal tempest I'd survived, and I let its steady pulse remind me that life, like water, always moved forward. I approached my desk, cleared of baby monitors and unopened envelopes, and sat before a blank notebook. My logistics firm had weathered the storm intact, clients rallied when I reassured them of my stability, and partners admired my decisive handling of the betrayal. Now, it was time to expand. I sketched a plan, diversify into international shipping, form strategic alliances in Asia, and develop a scholarship fund for single fathers who, like me, had navigated parenthood through crisis. The irony of my own journey fueled a fierce determination. I would turn my pain into purpose. That afternoon, I met with my board of directors in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the river. Their faces registered surprise as I unveiled the scholarship proposal, complete with eligibility criteria, fundraising goals, and a launch timeline. This isn't charity, I emphasized. It's an investment in resilience. Their nods, tentative at first, grew enthusiastic as they recognized the value of aligning our brand with real social impact. By evening's end, we'd earmarked $500,000 to seed the inaugural scholarship, with plans to raise $1 million more through corporate partnerships. Walking back to my office, I passed through a lobby now devoid of courtroom whispers and flashing cameras. Security guards tipped their hats, receptionists offered genuine smiles, and I realized how thoroughly my world had shifted. The man who once carried sunflowers into a trap now wielded authority rooted in integrity and vision. I allowed myself a moment of pride before pressing onward. There was work to do. Over the next week, I drafted the scholarship guidelines with meticulous care. Applicants would submit essays about overcoming adversity as caregivers, commit to community projects, and attend a weekend leadership retreat. I contacted potential mentors, CEOs, nonprofit leaders, single fathers who had made significant contributions to their fields, and enlisted them to serve on our selection panel. With every email sent, every call made, I felt the walls I'd built around my heart soften, replaced by purpose. One evening, a plain envelope arrived at my desk, unmarked except for my name. Inside was a photograph of Junior, no return address, no note. He sat in a high chair, grinning with milk on his chin, wide eyes sparkling with innocence. My breath caught. The disembodied image of the child I'd fought to protect now stared back at me, a silent reminder of why I had rebuilt my life so deliberately. I turned the photo over, half expecting a message. Instead, I found only the blank white paper, an unspoken challenge. He deserved more. I placed the photograph on my desk and typed a reply on a sticky note. So did I. I slipped the note and photo into an envelope addressed simply, "To whom it may concern." I walked to the building's mailroom, dropped it in the outgoing bin, and walked away without looking back. Whatever hand had reached out to me, it was time to close the loop. That weekend, I visited a community center hosting a workshop for single parents. Layla had arranged for me to speak, though I hadn't prepared remarks. Standing before 20 people, mothers and fathers juggling work, childcare, and heartbreak, I realized how much this meant. I shared my story candidly. The birth that exposed betrayal, the legal battle that stripped away illusions, and the deliberate steps I'd taken to reclaim my life. I spoke of scholarship dreams, of resilience forged in fire, and of hope as an active choice. Faces in the audience shifted from skepticism to empathy. A few wiped tears. When I finished, one woman approached, mid-40s, steel in her eyes. She said, "Thank you. I lost everything, but you remind me there's something worth fighting for." In that moment, I knew the rebuild was truly underway. Back at home, I reviewed the scholarship applications flooding in, a testament to unmet need. Stories of fathers caring for sick children, parents single by circumstance, men grinding through 2 jobs to provide stability. Each essay underscored the urgency of my mission. I realized that rebuilding wasn't just about my business or my reputation. It was about creating a legacy of empowerment. Late that night, I set aside my laptop and gazed at the photograph of Junior on my desk. His face, incredulous and joyous, reminded me that innocence could be reclaimed even after deceit. I traced the outline of his grin with my finger and whispered into the quiet apartment, "I'll build something worthy of you." The next morning, I laced up running shoes and jogged along the lakeshore before dawn. The sun rose warm against my back, gilding the water in molten gold. Every step felt lighter, as though each mile erased another fragment of pain. By the time I returned home, my shirt soaked, I was ready to dive back into the day's work with renewed vigor. In the following months, the scholarship program took flight. Our first cohort of 10 fathers attended the retreat, workshops buzzed with mentorship, and stories of transformed lives began to surface on our website. Media outlets picked up the narrative. Logistics CEO launches scholarship for single dads, headlines celebrated. But for me, the true measure was the message from one recipient. "You didn't just restore my faith in myself, you gave me the tools to rebuild my family." As the calendar turned toward the first anniversary of Junior's birth, I reflected on the path from betrayal to rebuilding. I no longer saw that hospital hallway as a prison, but as the crucible where I'd forged a new identity. The shards of my past, sunflowers, shattered trust, courtroom drama, lay behind me, transformed into the bedrock of my future. I closed my laptop, stood from my desk, and walked to the balcony. Below, the city's pulse had quickened. Life surged forward with unrelenting energy. I breathed in the crisp air, filled my lungs with possibility, and whispered to the skyline, "This is just the beginning." And for the first time in a long while, the words felt undeniably true. I first encountered Elise by accident, or at least that's how it felt, as if fate had flipped a switch in the dim confines of a stuck elevator. It was 6 months after the divorce papers were finalized, and I was attending a tech summit downtown, there to pitch our new international logistics platform and to scout potential partners for the scholarship fund. The building's lobby buzzed with suited professionals, name badges glinting under the fluorescent lights. I stood waiting for the express elevator, portfolio in hand, rehearsing talking points for the CEO of a major shipping line I hoped to woo. When the doors opened, I stepped inside and pressed 42, the floor where the summit was being held. No one else got on. As the doors slid closed, a grinding hum filled the car. Then the lights flickered, and we came to a sudden, jarring halt. The panel blinked into darkness, leaving us in near blackness. The emergency lights kicked in seconds later, casting everything in a muted amber glow. I swallowed and pressed the alarm button, but the automated voice simply said maintenance would arrive shortly. I exhaled, closed my eyes, and counted to 10, steadying the slight flutter in my chest. Then I heard a soft breath behind me. "Great," a woman's voice murmured. "Stuck in a metal box. Exactly the networking opportunity one wanted." She sounded amused, but not cruelly so. I turned and found her leaning against the opposite wall, arms crossed. Even by emergency light standards, she was striking. Tall, poised, wearing a charcoal gray pantsuit that fit her like a second skin. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and her eyes shone with curiosity and something I guessed was intelligence. "Networking of a different kind," I replied, offering a half-smile. "I'm Miles Reed." The name carried weight here, I knew. But in this moment, it felt suddenly beside the point. "Elise Jordan," she said, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, deliberate. "Great name for a tech summit. Are you here to pitch or to learn?" "Both," I admitted. "I run a logistics firm that's expanding globally, and I'm launching a scholarship for single fathers." I watched her reaction closely. Many would test me, suspect I was capitalizing on my own scandal. But she simply tilted her head, considering. "Single fathers," she repeated. "That's uncommon." Her tone contained neither judgment nor pity, just interest. "What made you start that?" I smiled wryly. "Long story." I paused, then shared a concise version. The betrayal, the paternity test, the fallout, and the resolve to turn my pain into purpose. I braced for her response, sympathy or skepticism, but she nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like you built something from rubble," she said. "I respect that." I blinked, surprised by her candor. "Thank you." Then I asked, "What about you? What brings you to this summit?" She chuckled softly. "I'm a corporate strategist for a mid-sized AI firm. We're exploring logistics integration, predictive routing, demand forecasting. Keeping it niche for now." Her candor was refreshing. Too many here would resort to corporate jargon and buzzwords. She spoke plainly. We chatted easily as we waited for rescue. About market trends, about the challenges of scaling services internationally, and about the demands of balancing career and personal life. She told me about her volunteer work mentoring young women in finance, about her beloved rescue dog, and about the coffee shop she'd once owned before selling it. I found myself intrigued, not just by her resume, but by the sparkle in her eyes when she spoke of her passions. 20 minutes later, the doors finally shuttered open, and a maintenance tech ushered us out. We stepped into the fluorescent-lit hallway, blinking. I retrieved my portfolio, suddenly disinterested in the summit's pomp. "Thank you for the conversation," I said, surprising myself with how sincere I sounded. "Likewise," she replied, offering her phone. "Here, my card." She handed me a sleek metal business card etched with minimal information, her name, email, and the AI firm's logo. "No phone number. Text me if you want to continue this conversation. Over coffee next week." I hesitated only briefly before slipping the card into my jacket pocket. "I will." I watched her walk away, her confident stride carrying her through throngs of attendees, her presence leaving a quiet energy in her wake. I made my way to the conference hall, but the usual stir of activity felt muted. My mind kept drifting back to Elisa's smile, the way she'd laughed at a joke I hadn't even realized I'd told. Over the next few days, I found reasons to text her. 1. A link to an article on AI-driven supply chain efficiency. 2. A question about a volunteer program she mentioned. 3. An invitation to meet at the cafe I frequented by the river. Each message elicited quick, thoughtful responses, and soon we arranged to meet after the summit closed. When Friday evening arrived, I waited at a small bistro near the waterfront, the city lights reflecting on the rippling water. Elise arrived, slipping into the seat across from me with the same poise she'd shown in the elevator. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of the lake and the distant hum of traffic. She ordered tea. I asked for black coffee. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. She challenged my assumptions about logistics, making me see possibilities I'd overlooked. I probed her about her AI work, and she explained complex concepts with vivid analogies that made them crystal clear. We traded stories of heartbreak and resilience. Her painful divorce 2 years earlier, my own betrayal. Neither of us flinched from the past. Instead, We honored it as the foundation of the people we had become. At one point, she reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. "You're not like most people I meet," she said softly. "You let your past shape you, rather than define you." Her words struck me. In her eyes, I saw not pity or curiosity, but genuine respect. I realized then that I didn't have to keep proving myself. With Elise, I felt seen, not as the CEO who had been betrayed, nor as the man who fought a legal battle, but as someone capable of growth, vulnerability, and joy. As the restaurant's lights dimmed and the final patrons lingered over desserts, I walked her to her car. The street was lined with elm trees, their leaves shimmering in the glow of the lamps. She paused, looking up at me. "Thank you for tonight," she said. I reached for her hand. "Thank you for being you." She smiled, a genuine curve of warmth that lit her eyes. "I look forward to seeing what comes next." Standing there, hand in hand under the soft glow of the streetlight, I felt that familiar ache of my past transform into something hopeful. The hallway where sunflowers and lies had once defined me was still a memory, but now I was walking into a new corridor, one with Elise by my side, built on trust, laughter, and shared dreams. And for the first time in a long time, I believed in happily ever after. A year had passed since that morning in the hospital corridor. Since the sunflowers in my hand had wilted beneath the weight of deceit, I found myself standing at the same spot once more, sunlight filtering through the narrow window panes and casting long, pale lines across the linoleum floor. The room numbers scrolled past: 409, 410, 411, 412. My breath caught as I paused outside the door, memories rushing back in a violent tide. Jordan's laughter, Sienna's betrayal, Marisol's cold delight. But today, the hallway felt different, lighter, somehow. I squared my shoulders and stepped inside. The room was no longer Sienna's domain. A pastel mobile hung above the crib, its painted wooden stars spinning slowly. Photographs lined a small shelf, candid snapshots of a toddler's first steps, laughter frozen in time. My nephew, my brother's son, cooed softly from his rocker, oblivious to the ghost of the past. His mother, my sister, smiled at me from across the room. "You made it," she said quietly, voice thick with gratitude. I nodded, surprised by the ease in my chest. No sorrow, only peace. I crossed the threshold and approached the crib, hand outstretched. The baby's wide eyes followed me, and when I knelt to his level, he giggled, reaching for my fingers. The laughter was innocent, pure, a reminder that life moved forward despite everything. I rocked him gently, humming a lullaby I'd once sung to a child not mine, and realized that melody had transformed from an anthem of grief into one of hope. Behind me, my sister's soft footsteps carried her closer, and together we watched him. The walls of the room, once stained with betrayal and resentment, now gleamed with fresh paint and bright decals of animals in mid-leap. A framed poem hung above the changing table. "In this space we dream anew, in every sunrise find our cue." I traced the words with my eyes and felt their truth anchor me. This room, once a grave for my faith and family, had been reborn into a sanctuary of love. I inhaled the scent of baby powder and lavender, as comforting as forgiveness itself. My sister cleared her throat. "Thank you," she said, voice hushed, "for everything. For how you handled all of it." I shook my head. "You and your son deserve more than the echoes of my past." She smiled, brushing a curl behind her ear. "You showed me what it means to stand up for the ones you love. To rebuild." Her words resonated deeper than I expected. I had spent months reconstructing my life, expanding my firm, launching the scholarship, forging new bonds, but this moment, here, with family, felt like the true foundation. I stood and paced toward the door, pausing at the frame. Behind me, my nephew babbled, kicking his feet in delight. Ahead lay the corridor where I had once been broken. But the silence in my mind was not the emptiness of despair, it was the stillness of resolution. I turned back to my sister. "Take care of him," I said softly. "I'll stop by next week." She nodded, eyes bright. I placed a gentle kiss on the baby's forehead before retreating, each step lighter than the last. Once outside, the hallway stretched before me, unchanged in appearance but wholly transformed in meaning. The floor tiles gleamed, the walls seemed to hum with possibility. I walked past room 412 without hesitation, exhaling a breath I didn't know I'd held. The corridor no longer haunted me. Instead, it reminded me of the day I chose to stop pretending and to start living. I smiled, a genuine curve of warmth that stayed with me as I headed toward the exit. Outside, the spring sun shimmered off the windows, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming magnolias. I paused on the steps, looking back at the hospital's facade, the place where lies had been born and truths had been reclaimed. Cars drifted in and out of the lot. Visitors came and went. Infants cried and calmed. Life raced on, but I felt anchored by the journey that had brought me here. I reached into my pocket and fingered a small token. A single sunflower petal pressed between wax paper, collected from that first fateful day. I held the petal briefly before releasing it into the wind. It fluttered upward, dancing on the breeze until it vanished into the afternoon sky. Letting go felt like the final act of forgiveness, of myself, of the past, and of those who had wronged me. The petal's flight was unpredictable, beautiful, and free, everything I aspired to be. I closed my eyes and let the warmth of the sun wash over me, sweat beading on my brow but a smile steady on my lips. When I opened my eyes, I saw Elise approaching, her familiar stride confident against the hospital steps. She waved, coffee cup in hand, and that spark of curiosity lighting her gaze. I returned her wave, glad for her presence, for the life we were building together free of shadows. As she joined me, I held out my hand. She took it, warmth spreading between us like sunlight through stained glass. Together, we walked down the walkway, leaving behind the corridors of memory. My nephew's laughter echoed faintly as the hospital doors closed for the next wave of arrivals. Ahead, the city stretched, full of stories waiting to be written. I took a steady breath and whispered to Elise, "We've got a new chapter to write." And with the petals of the past scattered behind me, I stepped forward into the life I had reclaimed, stronger, wiser, and at peace.